You ever notice how some people can just respond instantly, like there's no pause between being asked something and knowing exactly what to say, exactly what to do, exactly how to react, and everything about it looks effortless, like they're just moving naturally through the moment without thinking twice. While, for you, even something simple creates a pause. Not a dramatic pause, not something obvious, just a small delay where your mind doesn't immediately settle. And in that delay, something else happens because instead of seeing one answer, your brain starts opening multiple versions at once, different ways to respond, different tones, different meanings, different outcomes. And suddenly, what was supposed to be a simple moment isn't simple anymore. And that shift happens so fast. You barely notice it starting. And it happens so quickly that you don't even consciously decide to do it. You just feel it. That moment where your brain doesn't land on one option. It branches, it splits, it explores. And instead of moving forward immediately, you're briefly holding several possibilities at the same time. Which means, even when you know what you could say, you're still processing what you should say. And that difference is small from the outside, but internally, it's everything. Because inside that moment, there's more happening than it looks like. Because from the outside, that pause can look like hesitation, like uncertainty, like you're unsure, or second guessing yourself. But internally, it doesn't feel like confusion at all. It feels like your brain is still working, still running through different paths, still comparing, still evaluating. And the reason you don't respond instantly isn't because you lack clarity. It's because you have too many directions available at once, and each one feels valid in its own way. Most people's thinking stops early. They take the first answer that feels right and move on. But your brain doesn't stop there. It keeps going. It keeps asking, what else? What if? What's better? What's more accurate? What's more precise? And because of that, even something small becomes layered, not complicated in a chaotic way, but expanded like a simple moment, opening into multiple versions of itself. And that expansion takes time. And when that happens in real time, it slows everything down. Because while other people are already responding, already deciding, already moving forward, your brain is still finishing its process, still comparing those internal versions, still trying to choose the one that makes the most sense. Not just immediately, but overall. And that extra layer of processing is where the delay comes from, not hesitation, just extended thinking. That's why it shows up in ways that are easy to miss, but hard to ignore, like pausing before replying, even when you fully understand the question, or rethinking what you're about to say right before you say it, or holding back for a second longer than expected, because you're still deciding between options that all seem valid. And sometimes, by the time you're ready, the conversation has already moved on, and you're left with the feeling that you were just slightly out of sync, like you were there, but just a second behind. And that creates a kind of quiet friction, because you know you're capable, you know you understand, but the timing doesn't always match the moment, and it can feel like you're just a step behind, not in knowledge, but in speed, like your brain is working on a different rhythm than everything around you. And that difference is hard to explain. If you've ever felt that gap, where you're not confused, but still not immediate, where you understand, but still pause, think about the last time that happened, and drop it in the comments. Because once you start noticing this pattern, you realize it's not rare, it's consistent, and it shows up more often than you think. And this is where people misunderstand it, because they call it overthinking. But it's not just thinking too much. It's that your brain doesn't settle on the first answer. It keeps processing beyond what's required for the moment. It doesn't just ask what works. It asks what works best, what makes the most sense, what aligns the most accurately. It's depth, not confusion. Your brain is built to simulate, to compare, to explore possibilities, not just one version of reality, but multiple potential versions at once. And that means every input gets expanded, every situation gets evaluated from more than one angle. Every response gets tested internally before it's expressed externally. And that internal testing takes time and When all of that happens within a few seconds, it naturally creates delay, not because something is missing, but because something extra is happening. Because while others are selecting the first workable option, your brain is still mapping the space around it, looking for better, not just fast. But the world doesn't operate on that level of depth. The world rewards speed. Quick answers feel confident. Fast decisions feel strong. Immediate responses feel certain. And anything slower can be interpreted as hesitation, even when it isn't, even when it's the opposite. So you end up in this space where your internal process doesn't match external expectations, where your depth doesn't align with the pace around you. And that creates a subtle but constant disconnect. Not big, but always there. Because part of you wants to respond quickly, to keep up, to not stand out in that way. But another part of you needs time. Not because you're unsure, but because your brain hasn't finished processing. And when you ignore that and rush anyway, something feels incomplete. Like you skipped something without meaning to. And when you rush, your brain doesn't stop. It just shifts the process to later. So after the moment is over, it comes back. It replays what you said. It reviews what you chose. It starts generating better versions, clearer versions, more accurate versions. And now you're doing the same thinking, just after the fact. Still processing, just delayed. That's why your mind returns to moments that are already finished. Not because you're stuck, but because your brain didn't complete its process in real time, so it completes it afterward. And that's where the replaying comes from, finishing what it started. And this is where the exhaustion builds. Not from the moment itself, but from everything around it, the processing before, the reviewing after, the constant evaluation. And over time, even small interactions can start to feel heavy. Not because they are, but because of what they become. Because nothing stays small. When your brain expands it, a short conversation becomes something you revisit. A simple decision becomes something you reevaluate. And what could have been a single moment becomes multiple layers of thought. And those layers don't disappear quickly. But here's the part most people miss. This doesn't come from weakness. It comes from how your brain is structured. From the fact that it doesn't stop early. From the fact that it keeps exploring beyond the obvious. It goes further. By default, people who move quickly often operate on one version. People who process deeply operate on multiple versions, and that difference changes everything. Speed versus depth, not right versus wrong. Because when you see multiple versions, nothing feels final right away. There's always another angle, another interpretation, another possibility. And that makes certainty harder to reach in the moment. There's always more to consider. So the shift isn't to force yourself to be faster. It's to understand what your brain is actually doing. To recognize the process instead of fighting it. Instead of asking why you're slow, you start recognizing that you're processing more, that your delay isn't emptiness, it's activity. It's not a gap. It's work happening. The next time you pause, instead of pushing through it, notice it, not as a flaw, but as your brain running its full process. Let it finish, without rushing it. Because when you stop fighting your pace, you stop adding pressure. You stop forcing incomplete clarity, and you allow your thinking to finish naturally. And that changes how everything feels. So if you've ever felt slightly out of sync, like everything around you moves faster than you do, it's not because you're behind. It's because your brain doesn't skip steps. It goes further before it settles. You're not slower, you're more thorough. And that difference isn't always easy, but it's also what allows you to see what others miss, to connect things others don't, and to understand things at a deeper level. So if this felt familiar, consider subscribing, because this is exactly what we're going to keep breaking down. Because once you understand this, it starts to make more sense.